Going to be learning together today, God willing, Parashat Beha'alothekha. It's a beautiful, beautiful, action-packed parasha. There's so much going on. Thinking to just give you an overview because we're not going to be able to touch on every part of it, but I just want you to get a sense of what's taking place in this week's reading. It's called Beha'alothekha because it starts with the command for Aharon to light the menorah, to raise up the lights, and we're going to be spending most of our time talking about that. And then it goes from there to talk about the Leviim and how they were consecrated. And then we talk about Pesach Sheni, which deals with the people who didn't have enough time to bring a korban during Pesach, and so they wanted to have a second chance. And then we go from there to the idea of the Aron being protected by clouds and by a fire at night. And from there it talks about the trumpets that were used for travel and for other purposes, holidays and all that. Then the narrative goes to Moshe inviting Yitro to come with him. It sounds like there's 20 different parashiyot in one. It's not me, it's the parasha. All of these are here this week, and since it's Monday and hopefully you'll be tuning into other parashiyot, I want you to know what you might encounter there. After Moshe invites Yitro and he declines the offer, we have the story of the Aron moving, which is a very big story in and of itself. I don't know if we're going to get a chance to go there, but it's a very exciting part of Sefer B'Midbar. So exciting that the Pesukim that describe the moving of the ark are considered a Sefer in and of themselves. So this parasha has possibly its own. There are commentaries that argue that there are 7 books of Moses. There's Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, and Bimidbar up until this point of the Aron traveling. Then they have the Aron traveling, the part that goes after it. So Bimidbar is technically like 3 different books. And then we have Devarim. So that is a whole story in and of itself. It's beautifully depicted. If you have time to see it in your Chumashim, there are upside down nuns flanking this area that describes the traveling of the Aron. Unfortunately, that is followed by complainers. They complain and God is furious with them. It doesn't even tell us what they're complaining about. Some of the commentaries say they were desire. They just desired things, and they got to the point where they just felt that nothing was going to be enough. So that's also a story in and of itself. We go from the complainers to the man. Because they complained, and they started to also add to their complaints the fact that they had free fish and the fact that they had all these delicacies in Egypt, which we all know were not the case. The Torah reminds us about the man that tasted like anything one could imagine. You could cook it, you could bake it, you could roast it. It had all types of uses. Then Moshe gets so upset. He says the words, did I give birth to these people? Did I give birth to them, that I should have to put up with all of their craziness? And Hashem responds by telling Moshe to choose 70 zekenim from the Sanhedrin, which is going to ultimately form our Sanhedrin, so that he could have help in judging the people and guiding the people. Next come this whole flock of quails. God says, you want meat? I'll give you meat. Ad asher yetzeh me'apechem, till it's coming out of your noses. And for 30 days, he sends down quail and quail until they're actually repulsed by it. 2 more major highlights in this week's parasha, and then we'll get to our matter for today. One of them is are these two men. They're a story in and of themselves, Eldad and Medad. There are two men that were prophesizing in the tent, and we will touch a little bit upon them in our lesson today. And the end of the parasha is Miriam, where she speaks of Moshe or of the Isha Kushit, or we could really look at it a variety of ways, but ultimately Hashem is not happy with her performance, and he smites her with sara'at, with a form of skin disease that she has to be quarantined outside of the camp for 7 days. And it ends beautifully, saying that the people would not travel. They waited until she healed, till they would go on their way. And so with that, that's just an introduction. It's a very, very action-packed parasha. I'd like to start at the very beginning because one of my favorite vessels is actually highlighted right at the beginning of the parasha. So if you happen to have your blue chumashim, it's on page 774. For those of you who are working out of any other chumash, it is chapter 8 in the book of Bimidbar. And it starts out, it's just 4 pesukim where we're going to start, we're going to put our focus right now. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, daber el Aharon, Hashem speaks to Moshe, and he tells him, speak to Aharon, ve'amarta elav, and say to him, when you raise up the nerot, the lights, opposite the menorah, ya'iru shiv'at hanerot, the 7 lights will become alit. I'm going to read you the other pesukim because I'm going to go back. Vaya'as ken Aharon, and Aharon did exactly that. He stood opposite the menorah and he raised up her lights just as Hashem had commanded Moshe. V'zeh ma'aseh, and then they come and they remind us that the menorah was hammered out of gold, and it had these nuts, and it had these flowers, and it had a beautiful, there was a beautiful vision that Moshe had been given, and that's how he had made the menorah. So it seems like the menorah that's being discussed here is a menorah that was fashioned by Moshe himself and is now being lit by Aharon. So there's a variety of questions that take place. The first type of question would be, why are we talking right now about Aharon lighting the menorah? We finished last week's parasha. We had everybody's flags in order. They were all in a special formation. Everybody was going to travel. That's what we were all set to do at the end of last week's parasha. And we're ready to go. We took a whole census. And now when we turn the page, we're all of a sudden being given instructions to light a menorah. And Rashi comes, and in his famous commentary, he says, you know something, everybody else was so busy bringing different sacrifices and different gifts for the Mishkan that Aharon and his tribal family was feeling left out. And so Hashem told Moshe, and it's beautiful because it says, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor. The words daber and lemor are both used here, and he uses them a second time. He says, daber el Aharon ve'amarta elav. So what's taking place here with the use of these words to introduce the menorah is that God is saying, you know what? Right now, Aharon might feel like like one of many. Daber, I'm speaking to everybody. This is a group effort. Everybody's coming together. It's a whole big national movement that's taking place. So I want you to go and I want you to be lemor. I want you to speak to him, so to speak, in a personal way. I want you to give Aharon a personal identity or a personal a job so that he won't feel so deflated. And the personal job that he gives him is ve'amarta elav. When you speak to Aharon, it's going to be you and him. It's going to be a private conversation, so to speak. He's not going to be just one of many. He's going to have a special role. What's so beautiful about the special role that Aharon is going to get is now he's sensitive to the needs of the individual. He knows what it feels to just feel like one of many, and it's important for the leader to have that sensitivity because he's going to be dealing now with people who aren't the Kohen Gadol. So in a way, it was healthy that he had this experience, but what Moshe is going to tell him now is you're going to be given the honor of lighting the menorah. Except in lighting the menorah, it doesn't use the words lighting the menorah. It uses the words Beha'alothekha. When you lift up the neirot, when you uplift the lights or the, what would be a better word? The flames, when you light up the flames. And I think it's important that those particular words are used here because not only is Aharon a person who is now deflated but is going to be raised up, but because we're raising you up, you're going to be charged with uplifting everybody else. That's the job of the Kohen. The job of the priest is to spiritually lift and boost the morale of the people. There's a very beautiful few verses in Mishle. Mishle was written, we believe, by King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, with the wisdom that Hashem endowed him. He writes in Mishle, in chapter 20, I'm going to start on verse 27, and I'm just going to take 3 verses of it so we can insert them here in our menorah study. He says, Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam, Chofes Kol Chadre Baten. I'll explain them. That's just one of the 3 verses. Ner Hashem. Do you know what the ner is? Do you know what the candle is? You know what the light of Hashem actually is? This menorah that you're lighting, do you know what you're actually kindling? Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam. You're actually kindling the soul of man. And it's even nicer because it doesn't say Nishmat Ish. It says Nishmat Adam. The candle that you're kindling, or the candle that is being lit, the flame that is being brought to be, is Nishmat Adam. It's the soul, not just of one man. Adam is the word for humanity. So with one candle, Aharon, you have the ability to ignite all of humanity. That gets so much more exciting because it forces us to look into the nature of what kindling lights are and what Aharon is doing at this point. So when he has to light, I don't know which way to take you first. I'll just say it now. And then when he has to light the Beha'alothekha word, this idea of raising and rising, he has to keep the wick or the flame to the wick until that light, that flame could rise on its own, until it's independent, which is also a very beautiful way if we want to inspire people, if we want to mentor people, if we want to share our light, so to speak, with other people. We have to do it in a way that we stay with them. We don't just give them a little flicker and we're on our way. We don't just toss them a penny and we're on our way. We need to help them in a way for them to find their independence. And once that flame is able to be its own independent flame, and that's what's so beautiful, that's how it could become Nishmat Adam. it's a chain reaction. So there are so many beautiful things the commentaries have to say. The first thing is they say Moshe was like a candle because he could ignite and light and inspire many people without losing his own light. So that's if not only don't you lose your own light, we're going to see soon, the person who gives others light is themselves going to be enlightened by God. I mean, there's so much we could say just about the menorah and this issue, but I want to show you the rest of the words of King Solomon, because he says, after he says it's Nishmat Adam, so just to take one more second, the soul of man, yes, is being ignited, but the soul of man has the ability to ignite. And the soul of man is always going up the way a candle is always rising upwards. Then it says, Chofes kol chadre baten. It's like a searchlight, like a strobe light, like a light that's able to illuminate. And this is what's so beautiful. The light is able to illuminate everything. You'd think that it would lighten everything external to them, but the Ner Hashem is actually, what does light do? Light permeates or radiates outwardly, but the light that is God, what does it do? It actually moves internally. It actually serves to light what? Every single crevice of our innards. It's a beautiful, beautiful imagery. And you know what it says next? Chesed ve'emet yitzru melech. So now that we have this strobe light that is literally lighting up our insides, it says chesed and emet. God knows who's really chesed. God knows who's really emet. We know if the intentions are pure. God knows this because it's Ner Hashem. And if he sees chesed and he sees emet, those are the foundations for a melech, for kingship. We're going to talk more about kingship moving forward. But God is already telling us in this hierarchy where you think that it's Aharon who's the one who's lighting the candle, and now we have a reverse situation where the guy who was feeling the smallest is now going to feel so big, it's going to cause an effect that the other people might feel disenfranchised or they may feel marginalized. And so the Torah is saying here, the light of Hashem is the neshama of every single human being. And every single human being at this particular time that you think there's only one king and only one Kohen, at this particular time, the Torah is, the Mishle is saying, this is what's yotzer. This is what forms a melech. This is what forms for kingship. In other words, every person is capable of being a king. I always say the mamlechet kohanim. That's how God created us. That was God's intent for us. And then it says, Vesa'ad bechesed kis'o. And God's foundation, in God's throne, I'm saying God's throne. The verse might be saying that the throne of that king, the one that we just established through chesed and through emet, what's going to happen? The chesed is actually going to be the foundation of his throne. Again, man's throne or God's throne. It's so beautiful. It reads both ways. And then I'm just going to take one more line out of there because I didn't know where to stop, and each line was more beautiful than the next. It says, Tiferet bachurim kocham. The tiferet, the beauty or the glory or the greatness of the youth is their strength. And the hadad of the zekenim, the glory of the elders, seva, is, I think it means their white hair, is their age, beseva tova, like at a good ripe age. And so what's being said here is that this Ner Hashem concept, that people are being able to, can be inspired, it's not just for any demographic. It's intended for every age group. It means the young people, they have strength. You can take their strength and use it to inspire them that way. But don't think that inspiration and kindling is just for the youth. It's also for the elderly. You're never too old to be inspired, to learn something new, to take a new task, to go that next mile. And so this is an introduction to Parashat Beha'alothekha, speaking of the menorah of Aharon and of what light represents, not just in the Mikdash, but in Torah as well. And so I entitled this class, that was the introduction, I entitled this class Fueling the Fire, because I'd like for you to get this idea that fueling fire means lighting ourselves up and lighting up other people. And with that, I want to move forward and see how the Torah views the menorah. Keep in mind there were many vessels in the Bet HaMikdash. Maybe I'll take a minute now to give you a little layout, a little blueprint. The entire Mishkan was rectangular. Within this big rectangle, there was a square. In that square was called Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies. Just for argument's sake, it was 10 cubits by 10 cubits, a perfect square. And in the center of that square was the Aron HaKodesh. And on top of the Aron, we had the Keruvim, which were those beautiful angels. And on top of that came the Shekhinah. The presence of God rests right in that area. Adjacent to that, touching that, moving forward, moving outward, was a 20 by 10, so it's double in length, but the same width, was what we would call the Kodesh, the Holy. In the Holy, you had the menorah on one side, the Lechem HaPanim. If I'm facing the Aron, then I would have the Lechem HaPanim on my right, I would have the menorah on my left, and then in the center, right in front of where the Aron would be, we would have our golden Mizbeach HaZahav, which what they put incense and incense offerings. And the idea was that if you moved the curtains between the Kodesh, Kodashim, and the Kodesh, if you moved those curtains, then what would be visible? God's presence, Shekhinah, which was on top of the cherubs, which were on top of the Aron HaKodesh. And so in order to protect the Shekhinah from being seen, the incense would make a smoke, and that would serve as a barrier so that the people in the outer courtyards would not have this vision. They would not look upon God's presence. Because God had said, Lo yar'eni ha'adam v'chai, man cannot look upon the presence of God and still be in life form, so to speak. And so these instructions that we're starting to get, and the placement specifically of the menorah. So the menorah, if you were walking, if you were the Kohen who's walking on Yom Kippur towards the Kodesh HaKodashim, the menorah would be on your left-hand side. But the menorah was lit daily, and it was quite the job. There was soot, it had to be cleaned, they had to get perfectly pressed olive oil. We're going to talk about the olive oil in a little bit. But just so that we could understand, one of the things that's being said here, and I maybe should take a minute and talk about it now, the way the Bet HaMikdash was structured, let's go from the unholiest area, which those vessels were made of the least precious metals, coppers and iron, to make the korbanot, and the sinks, and those items were made of the least precious metals. But as you got closer to the Kodesh, the showbread table, the menorah, the incense Mizbeach, for the Ketoret, all that was gold. And then when you got into the actual Kodesh Kodashim, everything in there was gold as well. So this middle area where the menorah is happens to be very interesting because the three things in that area, the showbread, lechem hapanim, the menorah, and the incense spices, this trio of vessels all shared something in common. They all were activated through the earth. What do I mean by that? The incense spices, all incense and spices come from the earth. They are things that grow from the earth. And the bread, the showbread, the lechem hapanim, that also came from the earth, the wheat to make the breads. And the menorah, which was lit with olive oil, the olives grow from the earth as well. So as we get closer to the Kodesh Kodashim, there wasn't really an act. There wasn't a ritual to get into the Kodesh Kodashim. There was a ritual with every other vessel, whether it was the sacrifices on the outside, that they were sacrificing animals and blood and sprinkling and all that stuff, or whether you came inside and you were lighting a menorah or putting the bread on the showbread or burning the incense. There were actions to be done. And so I think it's a beautiful way that the Torah starts to depict for us that we go from rituals, but in order to literally stand in the presence of Hashem, it's actually counterintuitive, but standing in the presence of Hashem requires no ritual. It just requires a pureness, a meditation. You know, the Kohanim used to meditate before they would go. They'd meditate for 7 days before they would go into the Kodesh Kodashim. They had to clear their mind of thoughts. They had to clear themselves of rituals that they would perform so that they could come in and just be. I should put a period there, and just be. But in this case, it's to be in the presence of Hashem. And so his presence is so overwhelming that these things, like the menorah that we're going to be discussing today, are a ritual, but that ritual is intended to prepare us so that we could we don't have Mishkan anymore, of course, but this is sort of a virtual preparation that every human does in order to get to this place of being able to, encounter some type of a divine presence, some type of a being embraced with the Shekhinah. And I think it's here, and I think it's in these parshiot, and I think that these things are written here because it's a way to say you may not have all those physical models and vessels, but Shekhinah is still alive and well, and there's still a way to access that, even that level of spirituality. So let's go slowly. One of the things that Rashi says, I'll just take a minute and cover this point. One of the things that Rashi says is that Aharon was deflated because he felt left out, and God said, I'm going to have something even greater for Aharon. And we say, what was so much greater? Everybody else brought all these gorgeous things. What was so great about the menorah? And the answer that the commentaries give is that God wanted to tell Aharon that when all of the other practices are going to become obsolete, or we're not going to practice them anymore because we don't have them, we're not in our Bet Mikdash, well, when it comes to the menorah, that's something that's going to endure forever. And he uses a little bit of a hint. He says, the Chanukat Habayit, this inauguration of the Bet HaMikdash, of this Mishkan, Aharon's Chanukah is going to endure forever. And that's a little bit of a remez, a little bit of a hint that Aharon is going to the menorah, this menorah that is Aharon's vessel, is going to still be during, for eternity, something that is going to continually be lit. Look, today we have in our shuls, we have the Ner Tamid. The Ner Tamid is right in front of the Aron because it's a symbol of eternal light that's always going to preface this access to the Holy of Holies, so to speak. And for many generations, it became forbidden. Before the Talmudic era even, it became forbidden to make any vessels that replicated those that were in the Beit HaMikdash, because they felt that only once we have a Beit HaMikdash could we have those exact vessels. And later on, it was said that they can be, so that we could have this vision. Many Batei Knesiot, many shuls have, if you'll see, they'll have a menorah on each side or on one side of the Aron. You'll see different shuls and different things. Almost every shul has a Ner Tamid, but they'll have a depiction of a menorah, and the idea is that we shouldn't forget these images, and we should always strive and yearn to reclaim this type of a mikdash in our lifetimes. There's actually a big, beautiful debate that takes place. That Ark of Titus? If you've ever been to Rome, they have that ark or arch, and in there they have this depiction of the people carrying vessels out of Yerushalayim and heading towards Rome. And there's actually a debate on that. It depends on who your tour guide is, but there's a debate whether the people carrying the menorah are the Romans who looted it, who took our vessels when they came and destroyed our Beit HaMikdash, or whether it was actually the Jews. And the idea is that we took the menorah with us to say, wherever we go, wherever we are, this internal light is going to be with us. And they took it with them as a symbol that we will return and we will bring our menorah back with us. I thought that was an interesting way to see an age-old arch that's been around for a pretty long time. So as we're talking about Aharon and his lighting up of the lamps, it says, when you lift them, when you raise them. And so we discussed that it could be we're raising people, we're raising ourselves, we're raising Aharon. Emotionally, there's also a very beautiful depiction that the lamps, when he lit them, they did this marvelous thing. You probably remember from like 7th or 8th grade, some teachers somewhere made a picture that there was 3 flames on one side, 3 flames on the other side, and then that center spine. And the flames on each side would orient themselves towards the center flame, and the center flame would go up this way. And so since we started by saying Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam, that the candles are very synonymous with people, I think a very beautiful way for us today to look at the menorah is to say the branches, the 7 branches, are typical of 7 different types of people. Meaning, there could be polar opposite people, literally on opposite ends of the candelabra, but as long as their energy is centered towards service of Hashem. In other words, there are many ways for us to illuminate the world. Every human being has this little light of mine to let it shine, and they each have an ability. One can do it through music, one can do it through literature, one can do it through art. There are so many ways, and what's beautiful now about this parasha is I'm going to try, it's not going to fit like a perfect puzzle, but I think the different types of people are actually in this week's parasha. Remember when we started and I said there's a hodgepodge of a million different things taking place. I don't see a rhyme and reason. We can try and manufacture one, but there's a lot of stuff. It seems like nobody knew what to do with all these little stories, so they stuck them all in one parasha. But I think there's more to it than that. I think what's beautiful is if we start to look at these different flames, at these different branches, for instance, as different categories of people, of Jews, who still all, I mean, if you want to be with me, I would say humanity. Humanity is comprised of 7 different types of essences of people. And depending on what religion you Google, they'll ascribe different character traits, but basically there are traits that make up a society, that make up the world society. And the important thing is for us to be able to hold them together, let them each go on their own way, let them each be their own branch, but have something that attaches us all. And of course, like the menorah, that center thing that's going to attach us is going to go heavenwards. So before we talk about these 7 stereotypes or character traits that we might want to call them, I just want to tell you one last thing. I know there's a lot of details, and there's it's the Mishkan itself has a ton of specifics and particulars that needed to be focused on. I just want to talk for a minute about the olive oil that was used to light the menorah. So the Talmud comes and explains that and it's in the Talmud of the minchas that you bring. A mincha is an offering that's flour and oil. In talking about the mincha that you might bring, it's a type of offering, a bread offering that's flour and oil. They talk about the olive oil. And for their purposes, this comes up in conversation because they want to see what type of oil do you have to use when you're making your bread offering. For us today, I'd like to say that when olive oil went through a purification process, it went through 3 cycles of pressings. And within each cycle of pressing, there were 3 presses. The first press, the second press, the third press. That was 1. First, second, third, 2, first, second, third, 3. 3 separate cycles of pressing. And we know when we buy olive oil, we always want to buy the first pressed olive oil. We feel that that one is the most potent, has the most nutrients, has the least amount of, it's not as diluted and all that stuff. So what's interesting, and I found this fascinating, is, of course, in the first set of pressings, only the first pressing is suitable to be considered shemen zayit zach. Shemen zayit that's able to be used to kindle the lights of the menorah. The second pressing of that first cycle, that second pressing could be used to make the bread and other stuff. This is where it gets interesting. In the second cycle, that first pressing, that's also allowed to be used for the menorah. But it's also equal in quality to the second pressing of the first cycle. I'll explain myself, and I think it's fascinating for what we're going to learn about now. In the 3 times that you're going to press the oil, only the first press of each time, the first press of A, the first press of B, and the first press of C, that could be used for the menorah. Now, even though the first press of B is the same exact, you take it to the lab and it's the same exact quality as the second press of A, which makes a little bit sense, right? The second press of the first is going to be equal to the first press of the second anyway. It's even like a little mathematics, right? The second of the first is similar to the first of the second. Anyway, those two, even though they both could be used equally, they're both have the same chemical components or whatever it is. If you put them in I don't know, a Bunsen burner, do whatever you want to do there, you wouldn't know the difference. You could only use the first press for the candles, and you could use either of them for the breads. Why is this even important? Why am I talking to you about pressing and olive oil? Because even the oil itself represents 3 different types of people. You can go with the first press, with the first bunch of people. Label them however you want to label them. That's up to you. They don't know. Torah's not putting labels on anybody or anything. But let's call it the top of the group, the creme de la creme, that first bunch. You can grow to, or you can have inherently fantastic qualities, but unless you're the best of what you could be in your cycle, only the best of each category is what is acceptable to God to light. That you want to light your flame. Let's make it simpler. You want to bring your A game. You want to bring your best self. You could be in a category where you may have deficiencies, you were born a certain way, or you have limitations. It doesn't matter if you're in the third bunch, if you're in the third cycle, that doesn't matter. What matters is that you're the best in your cycle, and you strive to be the highest and the best in your cycle. And that, the first press of the third category is equal to the first press of the first category, because in God's eyes, the famous, God's not going to ask us, why weren't you Moshe Rabbeinu? He doesn't expect that of you. He does expect you to be the best that you can in whatever circumstance you are, in whatever category you are, wherever it is, and whatever strengths you find yourself with, that you rise to the top of that, of those abilities. And so for today, I would like to say that, and by the way, I have so many things to say. It was the job of the people to bring the olive oil. I may want to just take 1 second because we really didn't do our usual. So I'll just do one. Go to page 464 just for 1 second. And that would be Shemot chapter 27, verses 20 and 21. It's the beginning of Parashat Tetzaveh. Ve'ata tetzaveh et bnei Yisrael v'yikhu elecha shemen zayit zach katit lamaor laha'alot ner tamid. What's being asked here is, after I gave you the whole spiel about Aharon being the one to light the candles, yeah, he's lighting the candles, but who's bringing the oil? The oil has to be brought by the people because it represents all of them. And it says here, speak to Bnei Yisrael, speak to all of the people, and let all of them bring the Shemen Zayit Zach. This is not something that was just a certain category of people that were going to bring this. The oil has to come from everybody because the menorah is going to represent everybody. And so with these 7 branches of the menorah that we were discussing, I'd like to see how they work as metaphors for these personalities or these essences. There's a spectrum, and I always say that everything revolves in the natural world around the number 7. We've done it with sounds and colors and days of the week and cycles for agriculture and cycles for Yovel and cycles for Shavuot, and we can go on and on talking about the 7s. And we know that if God shines his light, because we're talking about now the light of the menorah, if God's light is shining into a prism, we're going to get 7 different colors, and from purples to yellows, all the way down the whole color chart. And we believe that these are 7, these represent 7 types of people, 7 types of personalities. So Again, if you want to go Kabbalistic, there are so many teachings in this. I chose 7 words that I think are universally accepted, of traits that the Torah highlights as well. And the first one that I chose is the word chesed. And so let's for now just go with this idea that the first branch is going to represent chesed. What is chesed? Chesed is to be giving, to be outside of yourself, to be extroverted, to be so full of love and kindness that you're overflowing and you have enough to give to other people. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're wealthy and you have enough to give. It means that your tendency maybe, or your character, your way, is because there are people like Ruth who could be a Ba'alat Chesed, who technically didn't have much to give, or Rivka, who's going to give water to camels. She didn't have it. It was her type to access things because you want to project yourself in an outward way. And so one of these type people, like a typical, like a type of person, let's just say their essence might be of chesed. And so I believe that our parasha is going to talk to this type of person. And for today's class, I'd like to suggest that these type of people who are filled with chesed, they're the people who like to serve the common good of people, and everything they do is outward bound and extroverted, love, kindness. Well, they're the first. Let me see. Hello? Am I back? Oh, I'm frozen. Okay, 1 second. Let me see. How can I unfreeze internet? Okay, am I back on? Raise your hand, somebody, if you hear me. Okay, great. Stay with me. I have the worst internet on the planet. Oh, now you're good. Thank you, Jessica. Okay, so I was all excited. I hope you heard the part about the netunim, that the Kohanim are described. I'll show it to you again. I don't know at what point I lost you, but in chapter 8, verse 16, it says, Ki netunim hema, the Leviim are, that word for giving, or they have been given to me, is mentioned doubly. So I'd like to say that our first branch of the menorah, which represents chesed, which represents outwardness, which represents the Leviim, are these people that are netunim. They're basically givers. They're people who like to contribute to the common good. And I should say one last thing. With every positive aspect, there's also a negative aspect, so to speak, a downside. And I think this one speaks beautifully to what we had read in the beginning of the Parashah, which was, we had said that Aharon was feeling a little bit lost. He was feeling a little bit deflated. So when you're a person who does everything for the common good of the people, it's very easy for you to become a person who loses your own identity. And I think one of the reasons that the menorah is so beautifully symmetrical and so beautifully balanced is because within every one of these traits, we require a certain balance. For instance, my dad used to always say, too good, no good. So when we're going to do something like chesed, we have to make sure that it's balanced properly, that we're not just doing chesed for everybody outside of our household at the expense of the people that are inside of our household. We have to make sure that we're doing, and when I say household, I also mean our houses, our temples, our personal homes within us. So sometimes when we expand ourselves or expend ourselves too much for everybody else, my friend Katie reminds me every day, we have to also give ourselves this achshav ani moment, this time where we say, I need to honor myself, I need to respect myself, I need to give and feed and nurture myself too. All this is in one vessel of the Beit HaMikdash. Imagine how much it has to teach us. And so if chesed is one type of an essence, another essence would be givurah. The word givurah from the word gibor means to have strength, but the strength is restrained. It's a strength, it's not an outward strength. Of course, it's a strength that ultimately manifests itself outwardly, but it's a strength that comes from within. A good word for, or a good, I felt, parallel for the givurah might be the next thing that is mentioned, which is the Pesach Sheni. What is it about the Pesach Sheni? A person who is a gibor has a certain direction that they want to go in, but they go in that direction like a warrior, like a gibor, like a warrior. They have a way that they want to influence it, that they want to influence and make change in the world, but the way that they do it is in a very exacting and very precise way. So these people who were feeling like they missed the boat on Pesach, who felt like they missed the boat on being able to bring a Korban Pesach, they come to Moshe and they do it in such an exacting, precise way that God actually grants them a month later a makeup day for their Pesach. The third feature I'd like to highlight is this idea of tiferet. Tiferet, I would say, means maybe beauty. There are people, the idea of tiferet, and in Judaism, the idea of beauty means to be able to synthesize two different things. In other words, it could be taking and giving, but sort of synthesized or sort of combined, where sometimes I'm giving, sometimes I'm outward, sometimes I'm inward. This synthesis, I think, is beautifully depicted in the next story that we encounter in our Parashah, which is about the cloud that was over the Mishkan, over the Aron specifically in the daytime, and the pillar of fire that protected it at night. Again, all of these things are ways that we could sort of refine ourselves. When we see a menorah and we start to see chesed and we start to see gevurah, and gevurah, I didn't tell you, but that has a positive and a negative also. You know, you can be an influencer, but you could also go too far and impose your will and be too forceful. So you need to find a balance within every one of these. And this idea of tiferet is like the cloud and the fire. Sometimes you're just an essence like the clouds, which have their own makeup. And sometimes we need to be fire. We need to really, really, assert ourselves, make ourselves seen, make ourselves felt, as opposed to a cloud, which sometimes sort of sits in a background. Again, these are essences, and I'd like to say, other religions may say, oh, you have a chakra, or you have a type, you're a type A, you're a type this. I think the beauty of the menorah is telling us that we all are all of these types at different times in our lives. And since we all have tendencies for chesed, for gevurah, for tiferet, for these beautiful character traits, we need to be aware that there are two sides to these character traits as well, because the menorah is going to ultimately represent balance. It's going to have that beautiful symmetry to it. So the fourth expression, the fourth essence, would be this idea of netzach. Netzach is the word lenatzeach, sort of means to what's the word? Not to win, to be victorious. That's good. Netzach would be like a victory. And a person who strives towards victory is a person who has a competitive energy, so to speak. Many of the scholars, by the way, are synonymous with Netzach because they're always trying to learn something new. They're always challenging themselves. They're competing with themselves to keep learning new things. And one of the beautiful things that I could attribute to this idea of Netzach, which is victory, is the next chapter, is chapter 10, which talks about the trumpets. And the trumpets were blown specifically during times, of course, during times of war and during times of travel, but they were also blown in times of mo'adim, in times of celebrating momentous occasions. So you can think of trumpets blowing. It's an expression, so to speak. It's an expression of the person in their most victorious voice would be a trumpet. It would be an outward expression of victory, of having accomplished goals. The next one is hod. Hod in Hebrew, like hod would be maybe, I wish I had a better vocabulary to put an exact word on it. I'm going to say when you're able to master something that you're devoted to. So if you want to unmute yourself and give me a good word, if we were in class, I know you guys would have a better word. When achievement. Like a hod would be an achievement when you're devoted toward and striving towards achieving something, and you finally achieve that thing is a sense, gives you a sense, so to speak, of hod. And this hod, this achievement in Torah terms, is usually an achievement of understanding, of binah, of chokhmah. And for me, it's not surprising that the next thing that they talk about is going to be the Sanhedrin, that Moshe is going to appoint members of the Sanhedrin because he's overwhelmed and he needs people to share this role of being constantly devoted to the people. And the sixth essence would be Yesod. The word Yesod means a foundation. People who are Yesod, as we had seen in the words of Mishleh, when King Solomon wrote about this Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam, he wrote Vesa'ad Bechesed Kis'o. We're able to sort of create our own thrones. We're able to create this place of strength within ourselves, so that we could connect with others. But the idea of Yesod, something about a foundation, it has this idea of being condensed, of being a lot of forces and a lot of strength being brought together. And again, the way the Torah sees Yesod is as a special art, as being able to take great messages and condense them, and in few words make major statements. And the next people that we're going to encounter in our story are going to actually be Eldad and Medad. If you want to see their story for 10 seconds, because that's all we have, they're on page 792, which chapter 12, verse 26. These two men stay behind in the Machaneh. One is named Eldad and one is named Medad. And all of a sudden, Ruach vatanach alehem haruach, the Spirit of God rests upon them, and they don't leave the Ohel, and they end up being, por favor, and they end up being mitnabim b'machaneh. They end up having prophecy within the tent. And for us, this is, look, there's 100 things you could see. The rabbis say that the prophecy that they had was that they were saying that Moshe is going to die and Yehoshua is going to take us into Eretz Israel. I'd like to just take it at face value and say they were two men, and these men were in their homes, and in their homes the Spirit of God rested on them. And when the Spirit of God rested on them, they became prophets. And if we look at it in this simple format, it's telling us, and we're looking at it also through the prism of this menorah, and it's saying every person has the ability to have the presence of God resting upon them, even if they're in their own homes. You don't need to climb the highest mountain. You don't need to make a pilgrimage. Of course, during the time of the Beit HaMikdash and the three regalim, that was the intent. But today, this is written for us today, and we're reading it today. And reading this today says Eldad and Medad are a paradigm for us, that not only can we communicate with others, but God could communicate with us as well. And you know what Moshe's response is? He says, Mi yitin in verse 29, Kol am Hashem nevi'im. I wish, halavai, I wish that everybody was a Navi, that everybody could prophesize. What's Moshe saying? I mean, this is the chapter where Moshe is the most humble person on the face of the earth. It happens in this chapter. But the most humble person is the one to say, I am a candle that's lighting another. And when I light that other, it doesn't mean that he has to be a tad smaller than me, because why would I light somebody to be as great and mighty as me? If I'm going to give you my recipe, maybe I'm going to give you a little less. I don't want your finished product to be as good as mine. Then it's going to take away from my greatness. And the Torah says, no. When you light other people, when you give your recipes, when you inspire, when you teach other people in business, when you give them a trait, whatever it is, when you're in the position that you could make somebody as great as you, don't hold back. Don't think that by making them that much greater or as great as you, that you're now going to be smaller, because that's not what happens, says God. God says the people, when you're a person invested in lighting other people, I myself, says God, is going to give you your special light. So these ideas, this Eldad and Medad are here for so many reasons. One, to tell us that we all could be in our own homes and have this divine spirit resting upon us. And the other one is Moshe saying, bring it. I want the more Kohanim, the more Nevi'im, the more prophets, the better. And that's why I saved the best for last, because the last one is Malchut. Malchut, which is another essence, always referenced in Kabbalah, for instance, Malchut, which is kingship, which is one of the highest, essences a person could aspire to be. This aura of authority, of regality, of confidence. When this permeates our personality, and the next person that we're going to talk about when we turn the page is going to be Moshe himself. And he's going to be a paradigm for Malchut, but in a very different way than we may have imagined When we think Moshe, we may not think of all the pomp and posture that comes along with a king. We don't imagine the robes and we don't imagine the gold. We see him in one of those robes and sandals. We don't imagine it, but God is saying that is Malchut. That particular person that is able to just self-efface, to take themselves and say, my service in this world is for the benefit of everybody else. It's not about me. And again, like we said, the positives and negatives on each one of the traits, a king could be a tyrant, or a king could be a person that sees his role as responsible for all of the people. And that's who Moshe was. Anyway, I see I'm going a little over time. I'll be so quick. I just want to say one last thing because I think it's very important. There's a very beautiful, maybe I'll just end with this because whatever, I don't want to go too far over time. To close up those 7 essences, I would like to just reiterate is that as long as our actions are not self-serving, but they're directed towards bringing more goodness into the world, that's what's going to allow us to shine brightly and our world to become illuminated. There is a passage in Yeshayahu, you've all heard this term before, Ani Hashem keraticha b'tzedek, I Hashem, I'm calling out to you in tzedek, and I'm going to strengthen your hand, and I am going to treasure you, and I am going to make you my nation of covenant. And then we see those words, Le'or goyim, our position, our place, our role, our responsibility is to be a light unto the nations. And so I'm going to end with this beautiful, beautiful vision in Zechariah, because I think it's just too beautiful to leave out. Zechariah is a prophet who was meant to fuel our faithfulness in God, and he tells a lot about the coming of the Messianic days. And he has a vision, he has many visions, but one of his visions in the 4th chapter of Zechariah is an angel gives him a vision, and he says, what do you see? And he can't understand what he sees. And the text tells us that he sees a menorah, and the menorah has 7 pipes. Now, again, we have to use our imagination as well. If you Google Zechariah's menorah, you'll see a lot of different versions of it. What's very beautiful about it is it has 2 olive trees. In his vision, there's a menorah with 2 olive trees, one on the right side and one on the left side. And the olive trees are feeding the menorah. It's as if the olive oil is flowing directly from the trees, like arteries, from the trees into the pipes of the menorah, and that's what's illuminating the menorah. And so there are a lot of ways to understand what it is that the vision that he was being given. But I believe after the lesson that we did today, my hope, my wish, my belief, and my blessing all in one is that when we are a representation, when humanity is the representation of a menorah, where we are balanced, where we are radiating all of these beautiful essences that are represented, then as menorah, we said, nishmat adam, our neshama, our souls, our selves, we will be fed directly. We won't even have to go to the olive groves and start pressing the olive oil. The things that we need in order to illuminate, in order to light ourselves and the world around us, those will be sort of piped in for us. They will flow to us as naturally as this vision of Zechariah, where everything that we need, all we have to do is look to our right or look to our left, and those things will just simply, and to me, and I'll end with this, that is the vision of Gan Eden, where man didn't have to work for all of those material things. Rather, all he had to do is expend his energy on bringing this light and refining the self. And like God says, these two olive branches will constantly be by our sides to fuel us, to fuel the fire so that we could enlighten ourselves, in turn enlighten the world, in turn not feel in any way diminished or minimized by everything that we do to make others great. That only will give us a sense of enhanced greatness in the eyes of Hashem. And so with that I end.